keep someone from being able to perform their job in this case. And so impairment runs the gamut, right? So there are people who are certainly impaired because of use-related issues, but there are also people who are impaired because of psychological issues or because of physical issues. So one of the things that we've started doing in the kind of broader space is really looking at the behaviors that are associated with somebody being able to perform their job or not.
Excuse me, do you mind using the microphone, this one
Oh,
right here?
okay.
I'm
You mean I have to stay inside this thing again?
You're gonna walk around, you want to get the other kind of mic?
No, because it'll be okay for me to like stay in a box.
Sure?
Yeah.
We don't want to put you in a box.
It'll be interesting. So that's a great question, because one of the things that we know is that we over-focus on the use itself, right? And people can be heavy users, but being able to look at the entire spectrum and look at it in terms of behavior is what's critical. So thank you for your question. And if there's language, I try not to stay in my jargon, so please correct me on that. Why am I here today? Anyone? Somebody asked me, but they asked me for a reason. To talk about addiction. Because you had a priest, a rector, who suffered at the time with active addiction. Yes.
And also because we're coming out of having a bishop with similar issues.
Correct. So I've been out here now with you all. I've also been out here earlier to work with Bishop Smith and with all the clergy, because there's a tremendous amount of healing that needs to be done as well because of Bishop Breidenthal's issues with addiction. So this is one of my favorite slides that I ever get to use. It says, unnamed and unaddressed impairment of leaders causes damage within and beyond the body of Christ, right? So I work with physicians, I work with airline pilots, and when I think of my work with them, you know, we talk about things like, okay, well, it's a public health issue, right? If your physician is practicing medicine or performing a surgery or something along those lines, right, and they're impaired. Sadly, there's a lot of them, but it's a public health issue. It is a public safety issue if your pilot, who's flying, not going to fly me home today, but who's flying you wherever it is that you're going, has issues of impairment, right? That's public safety. That's and so one of the things that we had to figure out is, well, what is it if a priest or a clergy person is impaired? And so I asked some of my friends and colleagues, and because I thought, okay, well, it's preaching. You know, the thing they would miss most is preaching. It's not. The thing that priests miss the most is being able to celebrate the Eucharist, right? So pilots want to get back in the sky as quickly as they can. Physicians want to get back to practice as quickly and healthily as they can. And what is that motivation, if you will, for a clergy person, in this case for a priest and for a bishop, to get and do the hard work of recovery and to stay well? And it's because of sacramental ministry. What we also know, however, is that church polity impedes the ability of the church to intervene, to assess, and to treat people who are impaired, and then to care for the congregations and the parishes and the diocese and the family members and the children that are coming out of this community that's been injured. You with me? Okay, because I also can get a little excited and talk fast. And again, these slides are going to be yours. So the problem, why am I here? Devin resigned after a crisis in his addiction. And so one of the things that you all are getting to do is to heal and recover in the aftermath of having a rector who had a substance use disorder. There were several factors that allowed for the progression of his disease within and as your rector and within the parish that require these four things: awareness, acceptance, action, alignment with your values and action in order to facilitate your healing, okay? One of the things I've talked to Lynn a few times, I've talked to members of the vestry, I've talked to Bishop Smith, and one of the things that's so tricky is that sometimes people don't know the damage that's been caused to them, right? And so, it's like, well, we already did this. We already dealt with this. Why are you bringing this up? Why is this an issue? One of the things we know about use disorders, it takes between 18 months and 2 years for a system to heal and recover. And so quickly what we want to do is recover, but that piece of reconciliation is something that we as Christians, as part of the process, right? And so without reconciliation to ourselves, to others, and to God, healing really can't take place. And so it's not something that we can rush. I have the fortune of working with children as well, right? So we do a summer camp for kids whose parents who are suffering with parental addiction. And people often don't think those kids know what's going on. They may not know it in a language that's sophisticated, but the pictures they draw and the letters they write and the things that they say let us know that they experience trauma from other people's relationships with alcohol and or drugs. And so one of the things that we want to do is move from this place of complicity, even if you didn't know you were complicit, to one of mutual long-term health and wholeness between who is to come, right? So you all are actively in search. I was telling Lynn, kind of FYI, because when I was preaching, I was noticing it's like, y'all were looking at me like, how do you know these things? I spent some time on your website in that section that you all present, your forward-facing section that a person who is looking to come to a parish would review, so that I could make sure that it was current and I could tell you all about all of the good things that you're doing in ministry. So that's what I do. I like to do my homework. So, because the last thing that you want to do is have the same system in place that will attract someone else who may or may not be struggling with issues around substances. Because it's the system that allows for the things to happen that happen. And that's something that we're working on in the broader church, as well as in parishes, in dioceses. I'll pause for 1 minute to say that, gosh, I don't even remember how many years ago it was, but many years ago, and I think I actually may have the slide, how I came to this work within the church was I was appointed by then presiding Bishop Catherine to serve on the Commission on Impairment and Leadership, right? And so this commission was formed as a result of former Bishop Heather Cook crashing her car into a cyclist and killing him. And later on, you'll get to see the bicycle in the car. It's something that I continue to point back to. She's now out of prison. She's living in recovery, making her amends and doing the things that she needs to do. And our system was complicit in allowing her to move forward in her process because we weren't treating this as the health issue that it is. Does that make sense? Yes.
Are there things you can identify in the system that you say this has been injured by addiction? Can you identify behavior?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing because one of the pieces that's really important is that we don't want to say, gosh, maybe something's going on, because we have this fear that somehow if we do, we're going to get the person in trouble, right? So that keeps people from coming forward and just saying what they see, right? No one is being asked to be a diagnostician. No one is being asked to do any of those things, simply to express concern for another member of the body of Christ, right? I get to see it at the altar. I get to see it quite a bit. It was painfully obvious that she and Bishop Breidenthal had a severe alcohol use disorder. Jowls, red jowls, you can see their hands shaking when they're raising the elements. Behavior changes are what we look for. But those were really obvious to most people, and went unnoticed, unstated, and certainly misunderstood, right? So there was the practice of over-relying on mutual support groups, right? People said, well, she's going to meetings. Well, I'm in recovery, have been for 36 years, but in the beginning, I wasn't going to meetings because I was not drinking. I was going to meetings because somebody told me I had to have a piece of paper signed, right? And so people go to meetings impaired. And so shame on us for allowing that minimum mutual support that's anonymous to be the standard of care for our clergy, right? It really makes no sense that that's what we were doing. Jason?
Are we going to spend any time on the previous slide?
If you'd like to. Which one? Hidden in plain sight?
Yeah.
Sure.
No, sorry. That was
My favorite slide.
No, sorry.
Oh.
The one after that. The one before, we were just looking at it, one that was blank, but yes.
That one.
Exactly.
Yes.
So are we going to spend more
Yes. I just wanted to make sure I was getting questions.
Okay, because that's perfect. I just have a question about one of the elements of a recovery-ready parish.
Perfect. Go ahead.
We'll get to it.
No. Ask your question to make sure that I do get to it.
The second plank here attends to patterns and behaviors of clergy in every evaluative, discernment, and wellness opportunity from initial application of holy orders until death.
Yes.
I like that. I'm just concerned that it makes it about kind of an identified patient, namely the clergy person, rather than about a system and about a kind of mutual, in other words, what we're about is a healthy parish.
Correct.
And not just sort of making sure that we scrutinize our call leadership.
Absolutely.
Certainly there is that scrutiny and that accountability, but there's more than that.
Right. And we're going to get to exactly that when we look at the theological context of why we need to do this work. Oh, no. I don't want to miss, because I can talk about these things far too long. So I want to be able to answer questions and provide some education, certainly, but really being able to address the things that you all are wrestling with. Yes?
It seems to, well, I'm looking at the next to last bullet point up there. Is a community unafraid to face the truth with honest and compassionate to one another?
Mm-hmm.
Listening to the concerns when they haven't overwhelmed everything would be important. I don't know who would be listening. Having some way to express concerns that can connect with what we're doing as
Sure.
a parish would be important.
Sure. No, absolutely. We do a lot of debriefing and conversations and forums, and because that's how we heal, right? Is doing what we're doing, and for people to be able to be seen and heard.
What about when somebody in the parish first notices that they think there's a problem?
So kind of what is that process?
Yeah, what process can we look forward to?
So the process that is being put in place in this diocese is that someone can contact, without it being a Title IV issue, because this is a health issue, being able to contact someone on the bishop's staff. And therein lies the problem, right? If you have an impaired bishop, who are you going to call, right? To just be truthful. So again, making sure that the systems that are in place have the checks and balances that are necessary, right? We're never going to make it so that people don't have addiction. That's not what we're striving for. What we're striving for is around accountability, it's around health management, it's around relationship. We look at safety management and we look at reducing risk. And that's a healthy system. Physicians, if a physician knows that his colleague is struggling and does not go forward with making a concern, that person will lose their job. It's that important because these are really soul, in our case, right? What happens? We are damaging people's souls when we have people who are impaired, who are representing and who are serving in the capacities that we are. Yes. Yes, so Title IV is our disciplinary canon. And right now, that has been the canon by which a lot of these issues are addressed. And it's the wrong one. And since I'm on TV, I'm going to say it again. It's the wrong one. Because these are health issues. And as long as we are punishing people, folks go farther underground, people's lives are in jeopardy, people's lives end, right? That cyclist's life ended, not because we didn't know, but because we didn't act in a way that was meaningful. Absolutely. Important stuff. Yes? Yes, yes, absolutely, yes, yes. Right, and that's what people say. It's like, oh no, that piece of I'm telling on someone. How we talk about it at SpiritWorks is if you were driving down the street, we call it flashing our headlights, right? If you were driving down the street and it was dark, evening, and somebody flashed their headlights at you, right? We would just kind of, if it were me, I would look to see if the police were there, frankly, right? Because I might be speeding. If somebody else flashed their head, at some point, I'm going to go, gosh, what's going on with me? Because all of these people are expressing concern, right? They're not getting out of their cars. They're not pulling me over. They're just saying, wow, there's something that I see. There's something that I see that's going on. And with the cumulative effort of there's something that I see, don't go to your neighbor because that's one of the things we want to do. It's like, I want to make sure that before I say something, that this is absolutely correct. When we're trying to do that, we're in too deep, right? We're in too deep. When we say things, my famous one is, I was just trying to be helpful. That's my problem. I'm in too deep. I've stepped across a boundary that I need not step across. All right. Am I able to skip a slide? So again, this idea of becoming, what we call a safe haven, and creating within the diocese. So the two things that we want to have in place are preventative measures that include things like educational and training, learning more about impairment. So that's one of the commissions that's being truly reestablished. It was in the Diocese of Southern Ohio for years, and it kind of fizzled away. But that's something that's being reestablished, and Bishop Smith has put that in place again. So that's another place where people can go, to learn a little bit more, is to this particular commission of people that understand issues around addiction, recovery, and impairment, and can help with creating policies and practices and those kinds of things. So you have the preventative measures on the front end, and on the back end, we have responses that are effective, right? And so those are the two pieces that need to be there. And that ongoing support. It came somewhat as a surprise to me that your former rector was able to be in place for as long as he was. Had there been oversight, not from you all, but oversight from the diocesan office, and beyond that, from pastoral care. There are things that are in place that were not used, right? So one of the things that I got to do as a member of the Commission on Impairment and Leadership, what we did was we did crash reports. So, National Highway Safety Transportation. When there's a crash, they send in a group of people. And that group of people isn't there to assign blame. We are there to see what was in place and see what wasn't in place so that we can improve upon the mechanisms or the systems. And we saw a lot of things that were in place, we saw a tremendous amount of things that were not in place, out of which came a document that has recommendations as to how we need to go forward with this issue in this church. Yes. Oh.
I would expect that mental health issues might be self-medicated by a lot of people
Absolutely.
with alcohol and drugs. Is there a mental health overlap in this?
It needs to be better coordinated. I mean, and sadly, that's a kind of a healthcare delivery problem in general. I'm hopeful that, you know, as we're emerging from COVID, as we're seeing the number of deaths by suicide and deaths of despair from drug-related poisonings, that we're going to blend those two systems better. The reality is that substance use disorder is a form of mental illness. Many of us who have substance use disorders don't want to be included in that group. And so some of it is around, you know, again, just education, because most people don't even know that substance use disorder is a form of, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I had to remind the governor that substance use disorder, and it's in code. I mean, you know, it's like, y'all need to look at your laws, because we're doing a bad job on both fronts. Yes.
I was the junior warden, now I'm the senior warden. So I was the junior warden when Devin's addiction first became known to us.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that now the diocese has more things in place than 2 years ago?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, so Bishop Smith's kind of one of his major things that he did was, for the past 2 years, has been working with me, with other consultants, really looking at what was in place, what was not in place, and then really hearing again from the clergy during one of their big meetings, you know, because there were a lot of them who were frustrated as well. It's like, you know, some of them did make the phone calls and say, okay, hey, you know, we're seeing these things, and sometimes they got no response, sometimes they got bad responses. And so, you know, we have to do a better job. And I think that I've cracked the code recently. So we'll see. And part of that code is moving it from looking for punishment to keeping people safe, right? We value safety. Right, the church that I serve was one of the ones that was horrible back in the 70s and 80s when lots of not substance use, when lots of sexual behavior was taking place, and out of that came safe church and the need for those kinds of things to be put in place, and they're continuing to be strengthened and looked at and all of that kind of stuff. We need to look at issues of impairment from a safety standpoint as well. I can't even tell you, my original slides were about all of and what I often talk about is all of the resolutions that are passed and passed again, and there's no teeth. You know, we can pass them all we want, but if we're gonna continue to have, this is a new one that I heard about the other day. It was called, what is it called? Beer and hymns. I wanna go, but I don't want beer. But that's, you know, one of the things that's in policy, and many of the alcohol-related policies for dioceses are you're not supposed to advertise functions with an alcohol word in there, right? So pub theology, not supposed to do wine and cheese, beer but we're still doing it. So that's not getting us where we need to be. What will get our attention, and I am confident of it, is issues of safety, and pairing that with the intersection of our theology. So Jason, you should love these next few slides, because they really address what you are talking about and give kind of the foundation of why this work is different in the church. So the covenant of baptism, in which all of us, right? So there's no pecking order, there's no hierarchy when it comes to our baptismal covenant, right? We all make the same statements, that we are turning away from a life of sin and being reborn into a new life of Christ. And that also is the good news, because it allows us to begin to make some of these changes, right? So looking at, we're initiated into Christ's body, the church, and then we're enabled to live together in holiness and righteousness, to embody the risen Christ and exercise ministry in the world. When someone is impaired, they can't do those things, right? They just can't, no matter how hard they may want to. The community formed by baptism is one whose members are mutually interdependent. And so the health and wholeness of individual members or leaders of the community is not able to be unbound together with the health of that community. I can't say that fancy word, whatever, right? So it's we, right? And it kind of gets to what you were saying. This isn't about sending someone away, which is what we usually do. We send somebody to rehab, and then, you all are kind of left to figure it out or make it up in the absence of information. Those days are over, right? Those days are over. And I'm grateful grateful and sad that, that your diocese has had to take the lead on this. There's truly been opportunities for other dioceses to do this, and for whatever reason, have not been as successful. So the community formed by baptism, I think that's the one I read. It reflects an important aspect of the divine economy with regard to health and wholeness. So that's what we're talking about, health and wholeness. Health and wholeness, not the punishment plan, health and wholeness. What is healing for the individual is at the same time healing for the body and vice versa, in opposition to the ways of thinking that place, and this is a big one, that place the rights of the clergy in opposition to the rights of the parish or the Christian body, right? So we hold our clergy up to this esteemable place, and we sacrifice, frankly, ourselves and ultimately the functioning and health and wholeness of the clergy. And so all of us, right, as the body of Christ, that's why we are all affected, right? We may not think that, again, going back, we might not sometimes think that, what does this have to do with me, right? It has to do with all of us because of the pieces that we're pointing out in terms of the care of our souls, the theology that undergirds all of what takes place. Somebody mentioned earlier, and I talked about this piece of seeing and hearing one another. The community of Acts, the book of Acts, shows us what we need to do and what it needs to look like and how we can go about doing it, because we can. We just have to make the commitment to do so, right? So the people of that community understood that both the moment of anointing and the continued discipline of seeing and hearing one another as truly equal in Christ. That's how we are called to live, right? We talk about there's more than one order, right? And somehow when people are ordained, sometimes we forget, and then sometimes laity are like, well, I can't do that. Well, yes, you can, and we must. It's not easy. It's not easy to sometimes say what we see or say what we're concerned about. This is the tension that happens, right? The right to privacy and the need for accountability. That's part of that tension. The accountability to the community, the accountability to the church, accountability to us, accountability to our clergy. Another tension, and it's often talked about, is this piece of forgiveness, right? Well, we just need to forgive what happened and move on. Well, that's not responsible, right? We can forgive, and we can talk about what was not done that was right. I got an amen over here. I see it. Yes, that's right. I won't tell who it was. I just saw it. So just recognize that, right? The importance of taking responsibility for the consequences of one's behavior, right? That's still important. You can forgive someone, and then we can also ensure that that person and the system and the bishop and the offices take responsibility for the consequences of those behaviors, right? And I don't think that happened in a way that was healthy or wholesome or meaningful, if at all, right? That has to happen. That has to happen. The isolation of leaders and the authority structures within and among the diocese, the church, that work alongside denial, I see you going, codependence, we'll call it what it is, right? That prevent identification and treatment of people who are impaired. Right, so those are the structures that are there, okay? We're just gonna deny it, or we're gonna, we don't have the money to have somebody. There's 4-day evaluations. There are so many things that are in place to support learning from other, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but learning from other systems that have already had to do this work and adding our piece of theology that undergirds everything that we do. So that's the combination. Somebody over here, yes.
I understand the concept of listening, talking, and all that. Piece of forgiveness. Well, for the victim, a lot of times the injury is never addressed. You can forgive them, but they're still suffering from the injury.
Say more about that so that I can make sure I'm understanding.
You can forgive someone that hit you.
Mm-hmm.
The pain of the physical pain or mental pain is still exists.
That is correct. Yes. Yes. That is absolutely correct. And if the person is not seen or heard who expresses that, then there's another injury on top of it, right? And so that's often the even greater injury that people experience, called trauma.
Well, maybe that's the taking care of the mental aspect of it. Because we can talk back and forth and we can say what happened and all this, and this has happened and that. And they say, well, I guess I can forgive him or her. But what's happening internally
That's right.
has not been addressed.
Absolutely. That's correct. And that's what takes the time, right? It's not a quick fix. It's something that must be done in relationship, and we have to live into it. And some days we live into it better than other days. And so, again, that's equally why we do this in community and not in isolation. Does that make sense? You're right on, yes. All right. So this piece of changing church norms, and the church recognizes again and again and again, because we pass so many of these resolutions, that we're gonna do it differently, and then we don't do it differently. Case in point, Heather Cook's father, it's probably been 35, more than 40 years ago, was commissioned by the church pension fund to do a study on what was costing the church the most money. And so he did, and he presented a paper, and he said his findings were that if we do not get a hold of issues related to alcohol use and impairment, something horrible is going to happen in the church. And 35 years later, his daughter struck and killed a cyclist, right? And so it's like, wow, do we have to wait until this happens again before we really do something different? I mean, thankfully, Bishop Bridenthal didn't die. He was headed there. He was headed. Chronic late-stage alcoholism. Thankfully, that didn't have to happen. So we keep getting these windows of opportunity to do something different, and have yet to do so, though I'm convinced that if we address it for what it is, which is an issue of health and wholeness and not one of punishment. Other questions or comments? Yes?
You made the statement that you were surprised that it took this long.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that someone that is addicted is, for a long period of time, is so good at hiding
Absolutely.
the symptoms or has come up with behavior that just completely fools everybody.
And sometimes it's atrocious.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
sometimes leads to things like,
Yeah, or lies about it, right,
lies, and removes
right.
people from positions because that
Right.
person feels threatened. So yeah, I mean, it may start very mildly, but when you live to drink and drink to live, you've got to keep the booze in your body. And so that relationship, sadly, becomes the most important relationship before your
Right.
spouse, your children, before God. It's a 15-second feeling of survival that you have to have this or you're going to die.
Right.
And yes, people do some really atrocious drinking and driving.
Right, right.
You know, I'm going to fire all my staff because I don't want them to know what I'm doing. Right? Those are the things that people do.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to keep booze in my desk. One of my favorite one is the person who had a leg bag, right? And so, because they knew at some point they were going to be asked for a urine screen. So they just brought it with them, right? Then you can't catch me. So we go to these really extreme lengths. Urine that doesn't belong to a human. It's like, wow, this is not human urine, it's a dog's urine. One of my other favorites was, you tested negative, this was a gentleman, you tested negative, but you're pregnant. That was one of my favorites. So, clearly, that was barred. You can even buy urine over the internet. I mean, so these are the extremes that people are going to. So just imagine the soul sickness, right? The moral injury that would lead somebody to do something like that. The things that they do to their children. You know, the stories that they tell their children. And some of us grew up in these households, so we know, right? We know the experience of being a child of parental addiction. We know what it means to be a child of mental illness, severe untreated mental illness. We know. And it's manageable, and we know that too. And so we need to do a better job. So one of the recommendations that came out of the Commission on Impairment and Leadership was that we need to take actions that promote a significant cultural shift in the Episcopal Church. These recommendations address the problem of impaired leaders, and they also diagnose and suggest treatment for an impaired system that maintains denial and helplessness towards addiction, mental illness, and physical disease, right? So we called it out because we had opportunity to, right? Those are broader issues of impairment around mental illness and physical disease that sometimes, I'm on a listserv of physicians, and one of the things that this particular group is struggling with is that there's a physician who has Parkinson's, and it's starting to affect his cognition. That's impairment, right? That's not your bad or you're wrong. That's impairment. And so how do we, from a place of love and compassion and understanding and care for ourselves and each other, because the last thing that person wants to do is hurt himself or someone else. But it's hard. It's hard when it's time. And so people are like, well, let's just hold on. He'll be 72 soon. You can do a lot of damage between 65 and 72, right? And those are things that we do. And we think we're doing the right thing. But I'm here to tell you we're not. In the military, one of the things that I brought up to the commission is they do, what do they call it? Fitness of duty. Right? We don't do that in the church. We need to. They're starting to. It was one of the things that I brought up to the bishops. It's like, you know, y'all need to have a physical, and we need to know that you're still okay. Because holy orders, for many of them, was a long time ago. But unless you're making a major change, you don't have to do it again. Historically. Now you do. Now you do. Those are perfect windows of opportunity that we can just check to make sure you're doing okay, right? We do maintenance checkups we do it for our cars and for our air conditioning. Why wouldn't we do them for people who are called to serve? Yes?
I think this is very, very interesting. It's raised a lot of questions for me relative to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really my focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question I have is, how do we know how do we know how to define where we go from here? We've done some very positive things around this issue. We've been open about it, for one
Absolutely.
thing. And we've had various conversations that help us to identify how we feel about it and what our experiences with Father Devin in particular have been. So I guess the question I have is, where do we go from here?
Thank you. You're perfect.
And
Ta-da! Go ahead.
you did not plant me. I know that. But how do we know, now you're going to help us here, but how do we know what questions to ask and how to do it?
Right. So it's called, and it's used in other areas. We've brought it over into kind of health and wellness management. And we call it the Swiss cheese model, because no one slice is going to get you there, right? So there's a cluster of things that need to be in place. And so how do you get there? You work on the different clusters that would allow for somebody not to fall all the way through a hole. Does that make sense? And it's really, we know what it is for the individual. One of the things we're looking at, and because the process is the same, with the exception of use, that the larger system is going through, looking at what are those 9 slices of cheese, for lack of a better word, that parishes need to have in place that will minimize the risk and increase the safety around. Again, you may call another person who has issues of addiction, but you will have things in place that will allow you to see it sooner and to address it more swiftly and address it from a fashion that feels good to you all and is meaningful to you all as a parish. These issues have been here through eternity, and they're not going to go away, right? You know, God said, don't take that apple. And what do? We took it, right? I mean, so they're here. And so, you know, what can we put in place here? What are those different layers or slices of cheese that serve as safeguards for the individual and that serve as safeguards for you all as a parish? So that's the thing that, one of the things that I want to continue to work with you all on is coming up with your slices of cheese, your layers that are going to help that process. Because in helping that individual, it helps the parish. It strengthens everyone, right? You know, we look at, well, why don't people want to come to church anymore, young people? Because they don't think it's relevant and because they think we're hypocrites. They're pretty clear. You know, so we got work to do, right? We've got work to do. You know, when I get to do focus groups with them, it's like, okay, today would have been a good day not to wear my collar, but to just listen. But they're very clear, and we want them to return to. This is the best thing that there is in the world, is having a relationship with God. We wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't. And so being able to offer that. What are those weaknesses that are in the system that we need to layer up to be able to do this differently? Does that make sense? And we've got other workplaces that we can learn from. We've got, as I mentioned earlier, physicians' health programs, pilots program, lawyers helping lawyers programs. These are all very successful programs. I studied under the gentleman who created the physicians' health program. So it's like picking his brain while his brain is still pretty good, and he's allowing it to be picked. One of the first things that we have to agree on as a church is that clergy are safety-sensitive workers. So when a healthcare worker develops a potentially impairing condition, mental health, substance use disorder, the very nature of his or her work demands comprehensive and sustained monitoring to ensure his or her health and well-being. Those things are there. There are also distinct programs, distinct treatment centers that are designed to work with people, right? When I send somebody to treatment, And I'm not going to send a clergy person to a treatment center where they specialize in working with 18-year-old people with heroin addiction. I'm not. Those aren't his or her peers. But we don't know that. We just are so desperate that we want to send somebody to treatment, right? Because we want them out of pain and we want to be out of pain. We do that as family members. I mean, I get family members who will call and it's like, okay, I'm going to send. It's like, really? Your dad is 92 and you're going to and retired and you want to send him to treatment with 40-somethings who are still working. No peer group there. Peer group is really important because that's where a lot of the work is done, right? So looking at things that workplace environment issue, personality issues, responsibility to the public, and then that need for the person to balance privacy with the needs for public safety. And in our case, it would be soul safety. So that's the place where we need to start, and we need to agree that that's an issue. And then these are the fulcrums, right? These are the layers. Shared responsibility between, the leadership of the church, which would be the wardens, concerning a focus on safety, not punishment. Being able to provide comprehensive assessment and treatment. And if it's not something that a parish can afford, it needs to be kicked up to the diocese who needs to afford that for that clergy person. So that's improving the relationships. That's another slice of cheese. Having the expectation of recovery. 95% of the people who are physicians who get and stay sober for 5 years, at that point, they return to the general society or general public's likelihood of coming out of remission. It's pretty high. We know it works. We know that it works. We just have to do it. So these are the slices of cheese. These are the layers. Assertively linking to support programs. So it's like, what do we have for you all, right, for support? Is there a way to put into, say, a vestry meeting some ongoing monitoring and support and being able to check in with each other on, we call it junk, joy, and Jesus, right? So that's how we check in. What's your junk, what's your joy, and what's your Jesus? Especially that piece of Jesus. We used to call it high and low. But we as Christians need to know, where's God, where's Jesus in our life? Because that's a clue, right? If something is happening with that relationship, that's a clue that something's going on, right? We don't have to wait until we see somebody with jowls. We don't have to wait for that. We don't have to wait for that family member to no longer show up at church because they don't know what else to do. So where to start is what you were describing. Let me find where to start. Here we go. Utilizing what we do best, right? Tradition, experience, and resources. And then creating a strategic response to substance use disorder and recovery, right? Just because somebody gets in recovery doesn't make it's not all better. A lot of times it gets worse because they learn a new language. They want you to forget what it was that they did because they really still have really big egos and it's all about them. And I think you all got to see that in a really tragic way. Is that, you sent me to treatment, and that was really damaging. And you all know that too. So being able to recover from that and being able to find ways to be like that Acts community, to know that you're seen and heard when you talk about these really hard things. And you might have to do it for a while. We look at it like a spiral, and you had that insult, right? That injury back here. And you go all the way around, and sometimes it feels like you're right back there again. But with time and effort, you're really a little bit more forward, right? So you don't ever have to go back to that injury, that insult. But you will go around it, and you'll come back to it. And that's why that piece of ongoing monitoring and support and those kinds of things, that accountability, those check-ins are so important for you all. And being able to put in some strategies and things in your meetings to raise that issue. One of the things we do at Bruton is we pray for the victims of addiction. It's in our prayer book. So that's one of the things in our prayers for the people. It's really important because we don't ever want to forget. And I don't think you all ever want to forget either. And the good news is that it will strengthen your relationships. It'll strengthen your reliance on God. I personally believe that folks who are in recovery, systems that are in recovery, are some of the most amazing systems, because we know that without God, we are absolutely nothing. Our behaviors have shown that to us time and time again. And we just need to not ever forget that. Any final questions or comments? Yes?
I have a question, but it's not me.
Okay, good.
Jason, can you tell us at the seminary how these issues are being addressed?
I actually can answer that question, because I teach a course at the seminary. I'm teaching a course. If anybody wants to take the course, Bishop Smith has been generous to pay for it for people. If they ran out of money, let me know, and I will get you into the class, because that's one of the pieces around misinformation that's out there, is that we haven't kept up with science, not to be scientists, but to at least know the theology and have an understanding. One of the things we've learned is, people through the years said people have to hit rock bottom. It's like rock bottom is dead. Dead people don't recover, right? And so, rethinking what does that mean? And so those are some of the things that we talk about in that seminary course. So and it's all online. You get to hang out with me on Sunday afternoon, so we kind of come together and talk about things. But yeah, the science is there, the compassion is there. We're funny because it's not, my goal is eventually that there will be a section in the Safe Church modules, not that there's plenty, because I just redid 13 of them, but 14 is a good number, so that people who are in these safety sensitive positions can get the education that they need. So yeah, no, it's a great question, because it's fun to teach at the seminary. However, that piece of anybody who's forward-facing with children doing any form of leadership needs to have a basic understanding. Thank you for your question.
And your course is open to anyone.
Absolutely, it is. Correct.
We all wanted to take it. Yeah, it's there.
Yep. Yes.
Am I right that you are going to be working with our parish and our vestry in the future?
Yes. I didn't go to the zoo this time. I have to come back again. I understand it's an amazing zoo. Anyone else? And Lynn has my contact information, so if you have questions, I pick and choose. But when I started working with Bishop Smith, I said that I'm happy to do work with the Diocese of Southern Ohio. So there's a few that take too much time. We need to put some infrastructure. We need to have some models to be able to hold up for the rest of the church. And sadly, you all are a good model. Oh, yay. You're going to change the church. You're going to change the culture of the church from one of complicity and denial to one of wholeness, health, and transformation. That's a lot. So thank you.
Thank you.